The sandstorm had just begun to settle when Corporal Joran Velis heard the whimper. It was a thin, broken sound, almost lost beneath the groan of cooling metal and the distant crackle of dying fires across the battlefield. He'd been crouched behind the shattered remains of a hover tank, reloading his pulse rifle with numb fingers, his uniform stiff with dried blood that wasn't all his own. The ceasefire had been declared 3 hours ago, more of a mutual exhaustion than a truce, but neither side trusted it enough to lower their weapons. Still, Joran had ventured out to scavenge medkits from the dead. That's when he heard it again. A child's cry, muffled and desperate, coming from a collapsed supply tent 50 meters east. He moved without thinking. Instinct overrode protocol, overrode the voice in his head screaming that it could be a trap. The tent's canvas flapped like a dying bird in the hot wind, half buried under rubble from a nearby explosion. Joran shoved aside a twisted support beam and found her curled beneath a crate of ration packs. Tiny, trembling, and utterly alien. Her skin shimmered a soft cobalt blue beneath the desert sun. Her hair a cascade of pure white that looked almost luminous against the grime. She couldn't have been more than 5 standard years old. Her large eyes wide with terror, pupils dilated like black stars in a twilight sky. She wore a tattered silver tunic, torn at the shoulder, and clutched a small, glowing stone in her fist. Before Joran could speak, the distant whine of a scout drone pierced the air. Then came the unmistakable hum of a plasma turret powering up. From the ridge to the north, a Terran Alliance sniper had spotted movement. Joran didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, scooped the child into his arms, and threw himself flat as a searing bolt of energy vaporized the crate she'd been hiding under. Sand erupted in a blinding plume. Another shot followed, then another, closer, angrier. He scrambled behind the nearest cover, a half-buried APC with its rear hatch blown open. Bullets pinged off its armored flank as he curled his body around the alien girl, shielding her with his own. "Shoo, shoo," he whispered, though he doubted she understood Terran standard. "You're okay. You're safe now." She buried her face in his chest, her tiny hands gripping his fatigues like they were the only thing anchoring her to this world. For nearly 20 minutes, Joran lay there, heart hammering, sweat stinging his eyes, listening to the sporadic gunfire that refused to acknowledge the ceasefire. Eventually, the shots stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before. He waited another 10 minutes before daring to move. Back at his unit's makeshift camp, a cluster of scorched tents nestled in the lee of a rocky outcrop, Joran faced immediate suspicion. Lieutenant Harrow's eyes narrowed as Joran carried the child into the command tent. "You brought an alien into our perimeter?" Harrow hissed, hand hovering near his sidearm. "Are you insane, Velis? That's an Elther. Their fleet just glassed 3 colonies last week." "She's a child," Joran said, voice low but firm. "Not a soldier, not a weapon, just a kid caught in the crossfire." Harrow scoffed, but the medic, a wiry woman named Tessa with tired eyes and steady hands, stepped forward. "Let me check her," she said. "If she's injured, we treat her. That's the Geneva Accord, even if the Elther don't honor it." The girl flinched when Tessa approached, but Joran knelt beside her and held out his hand. Slowly, hesitantly, she placed her small blue fingers in his. Tessa examined her quickly. Minor abrasions, dehydration, shock, but no serious wounds. They gave her water, wrapped her in a thermal blanket, and set up a cot in the corner of Joran's own tent. He sat with her through the night, watching her sleep. Her white hair fanned out like moonlight on snow. He didn't know her name. She hadn't spoken a word. But when she woke at dawn and saw him, she didn't cry. She simply reached for him again. Days passed in uneasy stillness. The ceasefire held, though tension crackled in the air like static before a storm. Joran learned a few things. The girl responded to gentle tones. She liked the taste of citrus-flavored nutrient paste, wrinkling her nose at everything else. She mimicked his gestures, saluting when he did, copying the way he scratched his chin when thinking. Once, when a sand viper slithered near the tent flap, she let out a sharp, musical chirp that sent the creature darting away in panic. Joran laughed for the first time in months. He began calling her Lyra, a name that came to him in a dream. She seemed to like it. When he said it, her eyes lit up, and she'd press her small palm against his cheek. A gesture he later learned was an Elther sign of trust. On the 5th morning, the sky turned violet. It wasn't a storm. It was ships, dozens of them, sleek and obsidian black, descended from the upper atmosphere like silent birds of prey. They hovered just above the dunes, casting long shadows over the Terran camp. Alarms blared. Soldiers scrambled for cover, rifles raised, fingers tense on triggers. Joran's heart dropped into his stomach. He ran to his tent, grabbed Lyra, and held her close. "They're here for you, aren't they?" he murmured. She nodded, eyes wide but calm. Then she pointed toward the center of camp, where a ramp was lowering from the largest vessel. What followed defied every expectation. Instead of an assault, a single figure emerged, tall, regal, draped in flowing robes the color of midnight. Her skin matched Lyra's cobalt hue, her white hair braided with strands of silver that caught the desert light like liquid starlight. She moved with impossible grace across the sand, flanked by two armored warriors whose armor pulsed with faint bioluminescent patterns. No weapons were drawn. No threats were shouted. The Terran officers stood frozen, unsure whether to fire or flee, but the alien woman ignored them all. Her gaze locked onto Joran and the child in his arms. She stopped 10 paces away. Then, to everyone's astonishment, she knelt. "Can I eat with you, human?" she asked, her voice melodic yet firm, her Terran standard flawless. Joran blinked. Of all the things he expected, demands, accusations, vengeance, this wasn't one of them. Around him, soldiers exchanged bewildered glances. Even Harrow lowered his rifle slightly, brow furrowed. Joran stammered. "We've got rations. Not much, but yeah, you can eat with me." She rose smoothly, a faint smile touching her lips. "I am Queen Vela of the Elther Concord. This is my daughter, Princess Lyra." She gestured to the child, who now squirmed in Joran's arms, reaching for her mother with a joyful cry. Vela accepted her gently, pressing her forehead to Lyra's in a tender ritual Joran recognized from old xenocultural briefings. A bonding gesture, reserved for family and sacred trust. "You saved her life," Vela said, turning back to Joran. "When our evacuation shuttle was struck during the orbital bombardment, she was separated. We searched for days. We believed her lost, or worse." Joran shifted uncomfortably. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Vela said softly. "Not anyone. Your own commanders wanted her detained or worse, but you chose compassion over fear." She studied him, her silver-flecked eyes piercing yet kind. "For that, you have my eternal gratitude." She paused, then added, "And my proposal." That evening, under a sky thick with stars and the silent watch of Elther warships, Joran sat cross-legged on a sand-worn rug beside Queen Vela. Between them sat a simple meal, Terran nutrient cakes and Elther lumina fruit that glowed faintly as they ate. Lyra played nearby with a small hover toy that emitted soft chimes, giggling as it zipped around her head. "The war between our peoples was never about territory," Vela began, her voice low. "It was born of misunderstanding, a fear. The Elther do not conquer. We preserve. Your colonies were built atop the Veil Nexus, a network of quantum ley lines sacred to our ancestors. We tried to warn you, but your leaders called us aggressors when we disabled your drills." Joran frowned. "They told us you attacked without provocation." "A lie wrapped in panic," Vela sighed. "Just as your people believe we eat children, and we were taught your kind poison stars for sport." She offered a wry smile. "Fear breeds monsters in the mind." Lyra toddled over and plopped into Joran's lap, offering him a piece of glowing fruit. He took it and she beamed. "You have a bond with her," Vela observed. "Stronger than I expected. In our culture, one who shields a child from harm becomes kin, bound by blood oath, even if no blood is shared." Joran swallowed. "I didn't do it for a reward." "I know," Vela said. "That is why I offer not a reward, but a role." She explained then. The Elther Concord was fractured. A warlord faction, the Crithian Separatists, had seized control of 3 outer systems, using stolen Terran weapons to terrorize neutral worlds. They claimed the Concord was weak for seeking peace. Vela needed allies, true allies, not opportunists. And she needed someone the Terran Alliance would listen to, someone who had seen the truth with their own eyes. "I propose you return with us," she said. "Not as a prisoner, not as a guest, but as Lyra's shield, her sworn protector and advisor. In our court, that title carries great weight. You would have voice in matters of war and peace. And you would help me convince your people that coexistence is possible." Joran stared at her, stunned. "Me? A corporal? I'm nobody." "You are the man who held a child while plasma fire rained down," Vela said gently. "In my eyes, That makes you more than most kings. The next morning, the Terran command was furious. General Orin called it treason. Harrow accused Joran of being brainwashed, but Joran stood his ground. He had seen the way Lyra's eyes lit up when he taught her to whistle. He had felt the weight of her trust when she fell asleep on his shoulder. And he had looked into Vela's eyes and seen not an enemy, but a mother, exhausted, grieving, yet still reaching for peace. He accepted. The journey to the Elthery homeworld, Xyrus, was unlike anything Joran had imagined. Their ships didn't roar. They hummed, resonating with the same frequency as the Lumina fruit. The cities floated above crystalline oceans, tethered to the planet by vines of living light. Trees sang in the wind. Children played with creatures made of pure energy, laughing as they danced through the air. Lyra never left his side. She showed him the sky gardens, where flowers bloomed in colors that didn't exist in the Terran spectrum. She taught him to read the star charts etched into temple walls, maps not of space, but of memory. And slowly, haltingly, he began to learn her language, its vowels like wind through glass chimes. But peace was fragile. 3 weeks after his arrival, the Crithian separatists struck. They hit the orbital docks during the Festival of Twin Moons, when defenses were light and the city glowed with celebration. Their warships tore through the sky like black knives, firing ion cannons that shattered the light vines and sent floating districts crashing into the sea below. Panic erupted. Alarms wailed in harmonic dissonance. Joran found Vela in the command spire, her face grim as holograms flickered with destruction. Lyra clung to her leg, trembling. "They're targeting the Veil Nexus core," Vela said. "If they corrupt it, the entire network collapses. Billions of ancestral memories gone. Our history, our soul. We can't let that happen," Joran said. "There's a way," Vela replied. "But it requires someone to enter the Nexus chamber during the assault. The core must be stabilized manually. It's dangerous. The energy field will burn through flesh in seconds." "I'll go," Joran said without hesitation. Vela shook her head. "You're not Elthery. Your biology can't withstand the resonance." But Lyra stepped forward. She placed her small hand on Joran's chest, then on her mother's. Then she made a series of sharp, clicking sounds, a phrase Joran hadn't heard before. Vela's eyes widened. "She says, 'You carry the echo.'" "The what?" "In our oldest tales," Vela whispered, "when a human acts with pure selflessness toward an Elthery child, the veil imprints their soul with an echo, a resonance that allows them to walk where others cannot." She looked at Joran, wonder and fear mingling in her gaze. "If she speaks true, you may survive the chamber." There was no time to doubt. Joran nodded. The Nexus chamber was a cavern of swirling light, suspended in the heart of Xyrus's central spire. As he stepped inside, the air vibrated with ancient power. His skin prickled, his bones hummed, but he didn't burn. Lyra's faith had shielded him. Outside, the battle raged. Crithian drop pods slammed into the city. Elthery warriors clashed with mercenaries in scorched armor. Vela led the defense from the front lines, her silver staff crackling with defensive energy. Inside the chamber, Joran found the core, a pulsing orb of liquid starlight, flickering erratically as Crithian disruptors bombarded it from orbit. He placed his hands on the control runes, following the mental instructions Lyra had somehow imprinted in his mind. Pain seared through him, but he held on, gritting his teeth, pouring every ounce of will into the task. He thought of the desert, of a tiny blue hand reaching for his, of laughter under alien stars. The core stabilized. The disruptors failed. The Crithian fleet, sensing their plan unraveling, retreated into the void. Afterward, the city mourned its dead but celebrated its survival. At the victory gathering, Vela stood before the High Conclave and formally named Joran Lyra's shield, a title no human had ever held. He wore a circlet of woven starlight on his brow, and when Lyra ran to him, the crowd cheered. But Joran knew the war wasn't over. The Crithians would return, and the Terran Alliance still saw the Elthery as enemies. Yet as he sat that night on a balcony overlooking the glowing sea, Lyra asleep in his arms, he felt something he hadn't in years. Hope, because sometimes, peace doesn't begin with treaties or weapons. Sometimes it begins with a single act of kindness in a desert tent, when a soldier chooses to shield rather than shoot, and a child chooses to trust rather than fear. And from that fragile seed, whole worlds can grow. Weeks turned into months, and Joran settled into his new life with a quiet determination that surprised even himself. He trained with Elther warriors, learning to wield energy staves and read the subtle shifts in atmospheric pressure that signaled incoming threats. Lyra grew bolder, her laughter echoing through the crystalline halls of the royal spire, and she began calling him Jorval, a term that meant shield brother in the old tongue. Vela watched them both with a mixture of pride and sorrow, as though she knew peace was only a borrowed hour. Then came the transmission. It crackled through the Elthery comnexus during the hour of twin tides, a sacred time when the planet's magnetic fields aligned, allowing deep space signals to pierce the veil. The message wasn't from the Crithians. It was from Earth, specifically from General Orin himself. His face filled the holographic sphere, gaunt and shadowed, his uniform crisp but his eyes hollow. "Corporal Velis," he began, voice stripped of its usual bluster. "If you're receiving this, we need you." Joran stiffened. Around him, the Royal Council murmured in alarm. Vela raised a hand for silence. Orin continued, his words clipped but urgent. "The Crithian separatists struck Titan Colony 3 days ago. Not with plasma cannons, with bioplague warheads. They've infected the water recyclers. Thousands are dying. But that's not the worst of it." He paused, jaw tightening. "They're using Terran biotech, modified from our own black labs. Someone inside the Alliance is feeding them intel and weapons." A cold dread coiled in Joran's gut. Betrayal from within. Orin's gaze hardened. "We intercepted a data core from a downed Crithian scout. It contains coordinates to a hidden shipyard in the Ophion Belt. And a name, Director Kalen Rowe. He vanished after the Elthery first made contact. We thought he defected. Turns out, he's been brokering arms deals between the Separatists and rogue Terran syndicates. He's building a hybrid fleet, Elthery hulls with Terran AI cores. If it launches, it won't just attack your world or ours. It'll burn every neutral system between." The room fell silent. Even the ambient hum of the Nexus seemed to still. Vela turned to Joran. "This changes everything. It's a trap," one of the Elder Counselors hissed. "Orin seeks to lure us into open war. He wants our ships as cannon fodder." But Joran shook his head. "No, he's desperate. Orin doesn't beg. Ever." He looked at Vela. "If Rowe's behind this, he's not just arming the Crithians. He's manipulating both sides, pitting us against each other so he can rise from the ashes as a warlord of his own." Lyra tugged at his sleeve. Her eyes, wide and knowing, held a question he couldn't yet answer. Vela made her decision that night, not as a queen, but as a mother who had seen what division wrought. "We will go," she said, "but not as invaders, as investigators. And you, Jorval, will lead the envoy." The journey to the Ophion Belt was cloaked in silence. Their ship, the Whisper of Dawn, rode the quantum slipstream with no emissions, its hull disguised as asteroid debris. Joran stood at the observation deck, watching the stars blur into silver streaks. Lyra sat beside him, braiding strands of her white hair into a tiny knot. "A ritual for safe passage," she'd explained. "You're scared," she said suddenly, her voice small but sure. Joran exhaled. "Yeah, a little." "Mama says fear means you care," Lyra replied, pressing the braid into his palm. "So it's good." He closed his fingers around it. "Thanks, little star." They arrived at the coordinates to find not a shipyard, but a graveyard. Dozens of derelict vessels floated in the debris field, their hulls scorched, their cores cold. At the center hung a massive station, half collapsed, its insignia barely visible. The Terran Science Directorate seal, overprinted with the Crithian sigil. A serpent coiled around a shattered moon. "This isn't right," Joran muttered. "Orin said it was active." Then the ambush came, not from Crithians, not from Terrans, from drones, sleek, black, and utterly silent, emerging from the station's shadow like spiders from a corpse. They fired no plasma, no lasers. Instead, they unleashed sonic pulses that bypassed armor and vibrated directly into the nervous system. Elthery warriors cried out, clutching their heads as blood trickled from their ears. The Whisper of Dawn shuddered violently. "They're targeting our resonance," Vela shouted over the alarms. "The drones are tuned to Elthery biology." But Joran felt nothing. The pulses passed through him like wind. "Because I'm human," he realized aloud. "Rowe designed these to kill your people, but leave humans unharmed." It was the final piece. Rowe wasn't just selling weapons. He was engineering genocide, cleansing the galaxy of the Elthery while positioning himself as humanity's savior. A new order built on bones. Get to the escape pods, Vela ordered. I'll hold them off. No! Joran grabbed her arm. You're the queen. They need you alive. I'll go in. Before she could argue, he activated the ship's lone stealth skiff. A tiny, unshielded craft meant for reconnaissance. Lyra, he said, kneeling before her. Stay with your mother. Be brave. She didn't cry. She pressed her forehead to his, just as Vela had done that first day in the desert. Come back, Jorval, she whispered. He nodded and launched. Inside the station, the air was stale and metallic. Corpses littered the corridors, Elther scientists in lab coats, Terran engineers with their throats slit. Ro had purged everyone who knew too much. Joran moved like a ghost, pulse pistol in hand, following the hum of active machinery deeper into the core. There, in the central chamber, stood Director Kalen Ro. He was older than Joran remembered from military briefings. Gaunt, with eyes like chips of obsidian and a smile that never reached them. Around him, suspended in stasis fields, were hundreds of Elther children, Lyra's age, maybe younger. Their blue skin glowed faintly under the cold lights. Ah, Corporal Velis, Ro said, not turning. I wondered when you'd show up. The desert hero. The alien's pet. Joran raised his weapon. Let them go. Ro chuckled. These aren't prisoners. They're templates. Their neural patterns are being copied to train the AI cores. Pure empathy, you see? The Elther mind is uniquely attuned to harmony. Perfect for controlling hybrid warships. Once we strip away the inconvenient parts. You're insane. Pragmatic, Ro corrected. Humanity has spent centuries fearing what it doesn't understand. I'm giving it a future it can control. No more alien queens. No more fragile ceasefires. Just order. He tapped a console. And you're going to help me. Suddenly, Joran's comm crackled. It was Vela, but her voice was distorted, panicked. Joran, Lyra's gone. She slipped into a pod before we could stop her. She's heading to the station. His blood turned to ice. Ro smiled. Ah, the princess arrives. How convenient. True to his word, minutes later, a small pod docked at the station's lower bay. Lyra stepped out, alone. Her white hair glowing in the dim light, her small frame rigid with determination. Lyra, no! Joran shouted, but Ro activated a containment field, trapping him behind a shimmering barrier. The girl walked straight to Ro, unafraid. You hurt my people, she said, her Terran standard clearer than Joran had ever heard it. You took their memories, their songs. That is the worst crime. Ro knelt, feigning kindness. And what will you do, little one? Sing me to sleep. Lyra didn't flinch. She opened her palm and revealed the glowing stone she'd clutched in the desert all those months ago. The one Joran had thought was a toy, pulsed once. Then the entire station trembled. Alarms blared. The stasis fields flickered. The drones outside went haywire, colliding with each other in midair. What is this? Ro snarled, scrambling back. Joran remembered then the stone wasn't a toy. It was a veil seed, a fragment of the Nexus core itself, given to royal children as a last resort. A key to awaken dormant Elther tech. Lyra raised the stone high. You cannot silence the veil, she said. It remembers everything. The chamber lights flared blue. The walls began to breathe, ancient glyphs igniting across the metal. The station, built on stolen Elther foundations, was rejecting Ro's corruption. With a roar, the containment field around Joran collapsed. He lunged, tackling Ro to the ground just as the man reached for a neural disruptor. They grappled, fists flying, until Joran slammed Ro's head against the console. The director went limp, but the station was coming apart. Cracks spiderwebbed through the floor. Oxygen alarms wailed. Joran scooped up Lyra and sprinted for the skiff, the veil seed pulsing in her hand like a heartbeat. Behind them, the stasis pods opened one by one, the children awakening, confused but alive. Back aboard the Whisper of Dawn, Vela embraced her daughter so tightly Joran thought she might never let go. The rescued children were tended to by medics, their soft cries filling the ship with fragile hope. Ro was locked in a null cell, his secrets soon to be extracted, not through torture, but through Elther truth-weaving, a painless but inescapable neural dialogue. Yet as they prepared to jump back to Xyrus, Joran stood alone on the bridge, staring at the stars. Vela joined him. You saved them all, she said softly. I didn't do it alone, he replied, glancing at Lyra, who was showing the other children how to braid hair. She's the real hero. Vela smiled. Perhaps, But heroes need shields. She paused, then added, "There's more. When we scanned Ro's data core, we found something unexpected. A hidden file. Addressed to you." Joran frowned. "Me?" She handed him a crystal shard. He inserted it into the console. A new hologram appeared, not Ro, but a woman in a Terran medical uniform. Dr. Elira Voss, his sister. She'd been declared dead during the Helios outbreak 5 years ago. But here she was, alive, her face weary but determined. "Joran," she said, voice trembling. "If you're seeing this, Ro has you. Don't trust anyone in high command. They approved his project. They wanted the Elther gone. I tried to expose it. But they framed me. I've been hiding in the outer colonies, working with a resistance cell. We've got proof. Names, transactions, orders signed by Orin himself." The recording ended. Joran stood frozen. Orin hadn't been desperate. He'd been orchestrating. The plague on Titan? A false flag. The data core? Planted. He'd used Joran to lead the Elther straight into Ro's trap. And now, with Ro captured, Orin could blame everything on a rogue scientist and declare total war. The ceasefire was already ashes. Vela placed a hand on his shoulder. "What do we do?" Joran looked at Lyra, then at the stars, then at the faces of the rescued children. He thought of the desert, of a tiny hand reaching for his in the chaos of war. "We don't play their game," he said. "We change it." He turned to Vela, eyes blazing with resolve. "Broadcast Elira's evidence to every neutral system, every news net, every colony. Expose the truth. Then we go to Titan, not as soldiers, as healers, Elther medics, Terran doctors, working together to cure the plague. Let the galaxy see what real alliance looks like." Vela's eyes shone with pride. "And if Orin sends a fleet to stop us?" Joran smiled grimly. "Then we'll meet them, not with guns, but with witnesses, with cameras, with the truth." As the whisper of dawn leapt into the slipstream, bound for Titan and whatever came next, Lyra ran to Joran and took his hand. "Are we going to fix everything?" she asked. He squeezed her fingers. "Not everything, but we'll start." And in that moment, beneath the endless stars, the shield and the child sailed toward a future neither human nor Elther had dared imagine. One built not on conquest, but on the quiet, unbreakable courage of those who choose to protect rather than destroy. The journey to Titan Colony was fraught with tension, but not the kind Joran had expected. Instead of warships, they were met by silence, then, slowly, by curiosity. News of the broadcast had spread like wildfire through the galactic datawebs. Dr. Elira Voss's evidence, verified by neutral observers from the Cygnus Concord and the Free Martian enclaves, had shattered the Alliance's official narrative. Footage of Elther children rescued from Ro's lab, paired with decrypted orders bearing General Orin's biometric seal, left no room for denial. By the time the Whisper of Dawn entered Titan's orbit, half the Terran fleet stationed there had mutinied. Crews refused to fire on a ship carrying plague antidotes and medical teams. Docking wasn't granted by command. It was demanded by the colonists themselves, who swarmed the spaceport with signs reading, "Heal, don't harm," and "Truth over orders." Joran stepped onto the rust-colored soil of Titan not as a soldier, but as a bridge. Beside him walked Vela in simple healer's robes, her silver staff now tipped with a vial of luminiserum, a bioluminescent compound capable of neutralizing the Crithian-engineered pathogen. Behind them came Elther medics and Terran doctors, working side by side, their uniforms mismatched but their purpose unified. And at Joran's hand, as always, was Lyra, now wearing a tiny medtag around her neck, her white hair tied back with a ribbon woven from both Terran synththread and Elther starvine. The plague ward was a cavern of suffering. Rows of cots held men, women, and children gasping for air, their skin mottled with violet lesions. But within hours of the Elther serum's administration, the lesions began to fade. Within a day, the first patient sat up and asked for water. Hope, once a whisper, became a roar. General Orin was arrested not by rebels, but by his own officers, men and women who had followed him into a dozen battles but refused to follow him into lies. He offered no resistance, only a hollow stare as they led him away. "I thought I was protecting us," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "From the unknown." "Fear is not protection," Joran told him quietly before the guards took him out of earshot. "It's a cage." Weeks passed. The plague receded. The colony healed. And something else began to grow, not just between species but between hearts. It started with small things. A A Terran engineer teaching an Eltheri youth how to recalibrate a fusion core. An Eltheri elder showing human children how to listen to the wind songs of Titan's methane storms. Shared meals under twin suns. Laughter in two languages. And always at the center of it, Joran and Vela. Working, planning, dreaming. One evening, as the colony's newly repaired dome shimmered with auroras, Vela found Joran on the observation ridge, watching Lyra chase bioluminescent moths that had been bioengineered to thrive in Titan's atmosphere. "You've given us more than peace," Vela said, standing beside him. "You've given us a future." Joran shook his head. "We did it together." She turned to him then, her cobalt skin glowing in the twilight, her white hair catching the last rays of the setting sun. "There is a custom among my people," she said softly. "When two souls walk the same path through fire and emerge unbroken, they are offered a choice, to part as friends or to bind as one." Joran's breath caught. "You're not suggesting." "I am," she said, a rare vulnerability in her voice. "Not as queen and soldier, not as alien and human, but as Vela and Joran. Two people who chose kindness when the world demanded cruelty." He looked at her, really looked. Saw the exhaustion in her eyes, yes, but also the warmth, the humor, the quiet strength that had carried her through war and loss. And he saw the way Lyra ran to him not just as a protector but as family. "I don't know your customs," he said, "but I know my heart, and it's been yours since that day in the desert." She smiled, a true, unguarded smile, and took his hand. Their bonding ceremony was held beneath the open sky of Titan, on the very ground where plague tents once stood. There were no grand thrones, no royal robes, just a circle of stones laid by both Terran and Eltheri hands, and a single lumina tree planted at its center. Lyra stood between them, placing a circlet of woven starlight and steel on their joined hands. A symbol of unity forged in trial. The officiant, an old Eltheri seer with eyes like galaxies, spoke words that needed no translation. "Where one shields, the other trusts. Where one leads, the other follows. But together they rise." Afterward, there was feasting. Music blended Terran strings with Eltheri harmonic chimes. Children, blue-skinned and pale, human and hybrid, danced together in the grass that had begun to grow where ash once fell. Years flowed like rivers. The Eltheri Concord and the Terran Alliance signed the Treaty of Twin Moons, establishing the first joint system governance in galactic history. The Veil Nexus was open to human scholars, not as a weapon, but as a library of shared memory. And the Crithian separatists, deprived of Rose support and exposed as pawns of a corrupt regime, surrendered after a final, desperate stand on the ice plains of Vexus Prime. Joran never returned to active military service. Instead, he became the first human ambassador to the Concord and later co-chancellor of the Interstellar Accord. But his favorite title remained the one Lyra gave him on her 10th birthday, Father of My Heart. For though they never married in the human sense, Joran and Vela raised Lyra as their own, teaching her to value courage over conquest, empathy over empire. And when she came of age, Lyra chose not just to rule, but to heal, founding the Academy of Shared Stars, where human and Eltheri children learned side by side, not as future soldiers, but as future friends. On the day Joran turned 60, they returned to the desert where it all began. The battlefield was gone, replaced by a garden of luminoflowers and Terran olive trees, their roots intertwined beneath the sand. Lyra, now a young woman with her mother's grace and her father's stubborn kindness, stood with her own child, a boy with cobalt-tinted cheeks and a shock of white hair, on her hip. Joran sat beside Vela on a stone bench, their hands still intertwined after decades. "Do you ever wonder?" he asked softly. "What would have happened if I'd walked past that tent?" Vela leaned her head on his shoulder. "I don't wonder. I know. The galaxy would have burned a little longer. But you didn't walk past. You stopped. And in that moment, you changed everything." He smiled, watching his grandson reach for a glowing flower, his tiny fingers brushing its petals with awe. And in the quiet of the desert, beneath a sky full of stars that no longer belonged to one people or another, Joran Velis knew he had lived not just a good life, but a meaningful one. Not because he was a hero, but because he chose again and again to be kind. And in the end, that was enough.